This conversation that happened on the feast of St. Thomas Aquinas, it could have some serious effects for the entire world. If you don't know Jesus, you're never going to know justice. If you don't know justice, you're never going to truly understand the meaning of peace. Welcome to the Father Leo Show, where I'm dishing out faith, culture, and commentary. And in this episode, we are going to discuss what is a Catholic supposed to take away and even discern from the very difficult negotiations that took place last February the 28th, which just happened to be the feast of St. Thomas Aquinas. And it was also a day where I saw J.D. Vance speak at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast. And then just a couple hours later, you see on the news how a negotiation conversation between Trump, Vance, and President Zelensky went very south. What are Catholics supposed to do? What side do we pick? What are we supposed to be praying for? And how can we fulfill Jesus' commands to try to be peacemakers in a world that is seemingly facing the potential of World War III? But before we jump into it, please make sure you like, subscribe, share, and comment. Please, you got to know that it helps us to overcome the algorithms that want to suppress us. And as always, you're not going to get commentary with a Catholic pastoral perspective on the topics of the modern world, including politics, unless you watch our show. There aren't many kind of conversations with Catholic thought leaders about this, so we can certainly use your help by going to patreon.com/The Father Leo Show. Any support at any level certainly will help us to continue to dish out faith, culture, and commentary, especially for topics as difficult as negotiations going south and what are Catholics supposed to pray for next. So when we take a look at this situation, I immediately go to that of faith. And I know that this happened, over a week ago. But I am not one of these priests who want to just jump in and make an automatic response to the news of the day. It really does take some time away, discernment, seeing how things unfold. We could technically be getting all upset about nothing. But in this case, it was worth a week's worth of investigation to realize that this conversation that happened on the feast of St. Thomas Aquinas, it could have some serious effects for the entire world, perhaps even a World War III. And I'm not here to scare you, but I'm just here to let you know that if you don't know Jesus, then you're never going to know justice. If you don't know justice, you're never going to truly understand the meaning of peace, which is what the Prince of Peace wants to give to us. But in this case, negotiations, as you've already heard and seen a ton of news articles and videos about it, it went south. And people are going to blame Trump. They're going to blame Zelensky. What I really blame is a lack of understanding what Jesus wants of us. And so let's just admit that both President Trump, Vice President Vance, had to deal with a very tenuous situation in welcoming President Zelensky. There was one objective, and that was to sign over a minerals deal. 50% of the minerals, precious minerals from the Ukraine country's, earth, would be given to the United States in terms of a type of a payback, or at least a gesture of gratitude for the almost $500 billion that was sent from U.S. taxpayer money to fund a war that, honestly, I agree with President Trump, never should have started. And we know that this actually took place originally in 2014. And so we're dealing with a very long-standing war between two neighboring countries that actually share a lot of history. And we have to know that there are some people in Ukraine who are actually Russian sympathetic. And so there is a lot of cultural, political, social issues that we in America aren't fully going to understand. In part because America doesn't really have a desire to dominate the world. I think, the MAGA movement is about America first, not America only, but focusing on American values so that as a stronger nation, we can be of help to the rest of the world. We're not into taking over, even though I know people are going to say, well, why do we call it the Gulf of America, not the Gulf of Mexico? Well, in fact, because Americas actually describes the continent. South America, North America, it is the Gulf of America and not just one country. So I know historically we can kind of go round and round with colonization and taking over, but that is the Russian mentality to kind of, in a sense, reclaim the glories of the Russian kingdom, so to speak. But we're talking about neighbors. We're talking about people who have, again, very similar cultures, certainly similar foods, different language, but to some degree understandable to each other, and also different religion. And this is the interesting part, because there are groups of Ukrainian Catholics that are actually in union with the Holy Roman Catholic Church. And I have many friends who are Ukrainian Catholics. They have a liturgy that is Byzantine inspired, and it's very similar to what the Ukrainian Orthodox would be. But you've got to know that as a Roman Catholic Church, we are truly one family. Sadly, the Orthodox churches are not necessarily united. So the Ukrainian Orthodox would very much be pro-Ukraine, and the Russian Orthodox would be pro-Russian. And those two Orthodox churches won't always agree with each other. It would be more kind of ethnocentrically rather than theologically inspired. But now we're talking about a war. We're talking about a war between a country that is very small, and yes, it was invaded by a very large country. I know I sound like Miss Harris trying to dumb us down, but I'm getting to the basics here. And in reality, what is the smaller country supposed to do? I'm actually inspired by Luke chapter 14, verse 31. It says, "What king would go to war against another king without first sitting down with his counselors to discuss whether his army of 10,000 could defeat the army of 20,000 soldiers marching against him? Would he not instead send a delegation and try to work out a peace deal?" I think about this, and what saddens me is that it seems that common sense is just not so common anymore, even when it comes to this battle, this war. And it seems to me that some people think that we need to side we need to side Ukraine. And by doing so, we create a deeper rift and an enemy between United States and Russia. Russia, could they be considered an enemy? Perhaps, but I don't think those are good terms when it comes to trying to establish world peace. Maybe the better term is just simply say Russia is not an ally of the United States. It's just not. But then again, is Ukraine an ally of the United States? Well, technically, yes, because it is a democratic nation, so to speak, but it really is starting to look more dictatorial than democratic. But just because we are an ally, does that mean we have to fight their wars for them, especially knowing that they're not necessarily part of NATO, which is, again, we're going to get to that in my commentary. But in this case, all I'm trying to do is use common sense. What would the Catholic faith encourage us to do? Well, encourage Ukraine to be a little bit more humble. Now, granted, we recognize their fight. We recognize their right to be an independent nation, which they have, to have a right to be their own people, and a right to be protected from attacks from another country. That is a given. But they also have a right to think commonsensically and ask, if I have an army of 10,000 and I'm fighting a group of 20,000 coming in, what do I need to do in order to stop the killing, to stop the useless deaths? Why do I say this? It's because obviously my heart breaks for the devastation that the people in Ukraine are experiencing right now. millions of lives have been lost with both sides, on both sides. And I think especially about the Holy Father as he's kind of facing his own mortality. His words from the hospital were, as he's facing his own mortality, he just can't even fathom, especially now as he's approaching the throne of God, the absurdities of war. Have we not evolved as a nation? What is it that we just seek to just constantly create violence for other people? I am not a pacifist, but I am a peace-seeking kind of priest. I don't want to be ambivalent, and I don't want to pretend that everything is just high in the pie sky. Everyone should just love each other. No, I firmly believe there are some battles that need to be fought. But I also believe that if you don't have to fight, then take the diplomatic route, which is what we're going to discuss, because I don't think our culture fully understands the nuances of the diplomatic relationships. And thankfully, there are at least some Catholics who know how to be diplomats, and they also know how to fight. So let's jump into it with a conversation about this war and how culture is just absolutely confused. First and foremost, let's just admit that if you are pro-Zelensky, it's because you are anti-Trump. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people who just think, no, I voted for Trump, but I really hated how he reacted to Zelensky. Well, you might have voted for Trump, but that doesn't mean that you actually like the man. You just liked his policies better than you liked his personality. And I can simply say that in this case, I'm actually kind of grateful that we have a little bit of a bulldog and a guard dog in the White House right now. Because in the previous administration, President Zelensky would just walk in, he would ask for a certain amount of money, and he would just get it. And he would just get it. And that's the real sad thing. Very sad to me, because there was almost an assumption that whatever President Zelensky asks for, he's going to get. And it seems that Trump is now seen as the bad guy for not giving him the money. But we're going to talk about where I think things went south in my commentary. But I can say that culture is now divided severely. And please, don't get me wrong here. I'm not trying to be political. I'm trying to think with a Catholic perspective so that you as Catholics, or whoever is watching this, can approach this topic with a little bit more common sense. I think that the divide in this is not just between Trump versus Zelensky, but I think it's between liberals versus conservative, or globalism versus patriotism, or patriotism versus common sense. Let me explain. I want to first play this video as to why I think we need to really look at the reality. I don't think Zelensky is grateful. I think he presumes that America is going to not only foot his bill, but fight his war, because we are the only superpower that can handle Russia. And I know this because in the previous administration, President Biden complained that Zelensky was ungrateful. This is a news clip that describes just that. Zelensky isn't as grateful as he thinks he is.
NBC News has new exclusive reporting about a phone call that happened between President Biden and the Ukrainian president back in June. What do we know about that conversation, Courtney?
Yeah, that's right, Kate. So in this conversation, President Biden called President Zelensky to tell him about a roughly $1 billion package of additional equipment and weapons for the Ukrainian military coming from the United States. During the course of the call, President Zelensky continued, according to a number of officials who we spoke with who are familiar with the call, President Zelensky continued to talk about the additional equipment and weapons and support that he and his military needed. According to these officials, they said that President Biden finally just got frustrated and lost his temper and told President Zelensky, look, you could be a little bit more grateful. The reason that this story is interesting to us and is something that we are reporting on and officials are speaking to us about is because it shows that all these months ago, President Biden already realized that there was going to be a point where the American people, members of Congress, where people would start potentially pushing back on all these billions and billions of dollars of aid and equipment that the U.S. has been providing to Ukraine. And he knew that the narrative out there needed to be that the Ukrainian people and President Zelensky were grateful for it if the support was going to continue at that same level, Kate.
That was a news story by NBC, hardly a pro-Trump network, and that was on the October 31st, 2022. And I also just want to point out, if you actually are watching this video, watch it clearly again, and you're going to see something interesting. President Zelensky actually knows how to wear a suit. He has one. He wore it when he'd seen President Biden. Didn't do it this time. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But I'm talking about this simply because there does seem to be a lack of gratitude. But yet, when you go to the people in Ukraine, you have a lot of videos of just people, especially in Kyiv, a bigger city, where they're going to have very anti-American, anti-Trump rhetoric and sentiment because of this past Oval Office failed negotiation. Yet, I want you to see something also strange. While a war is going on in Kyiv, there doesn't seem to be much of an issue because bars are apparently thriving, even in the midst of the war. Check this out.
We welcome you back to CBS Mornings. As the war rages in Ukraine and cities are pounded by the Russian missiles, you may be surprised to learn that the nightlife in the country, well, it's thriving. The bars, the clubs, and the restaurants, they are all packed. Charlie D'Agata met up with customers and business owners to find out why the partying has not stopped in Ukraine.
A summer's evening, a sidewalk cafe, smiling friends. It could be anywhere. Except it's not anywhere. Kyiv is not far from the Russian border and within easy reach of missiles and airstrikes. And while many buildings remain boarded up, the remote yet real possibility of dying hasn't stopped its residents from living. Like 20-year-old student George Soldatenko and his friends Nikolai and Andrei.
Sometimes rockets really just boom, boom at night, and that could be scary. But you know, in the morning, when you wake up, you trying just trying to have a good morning, your routine, and that's all.
Despite the rockets, Ukraine's nightlife is rocking. The bars and clubs are full. The place is jumping, music pumping, drinks flow freely, and they dance like there's no tomorrow.
It's a very sad thing to hear that, these young people are facing the tragedies of war, but there's almost like a carelessness to it. So it's very hard to feel sympathetic to a nation that doesn't seem grateful. And I know that they are. In my heart of hearts, I know that they are. But it doesn't seem like it is towards America. Because let's admit, most Europe looks down on America. Excuse me, at least the leaders do. The citizens, they have a great respect, especially from the humble origins and the countryside. They have a great respect for America. I know because I've traveled to these places. I remember when I went to Russia and I was there, the people absolutely loved the fact that I was American. I met some Russians on a recent trip, and they just said, thank God for President Trump. It's a very strange thing what we see on the news versus what you see on the ground. And what these young people, and by the way, this was in July of 2023. This was a story at the height, really the height of the war. They seem to just be living it up without a care in the world. And it just makes me ask, how much of a crisis are we in? Because we think that the whole country is being devastated, and certainly parts of it is devastated. But where do we go with all of this? Well, we basically have Europe trying to become a superpower. And it's almost like there is a power grab. And what I'm discovering after just kind of research is that maybe the deals for the mineral exchange wasn't 100% true. I can only give to you what a trusted, more trusted news source has to offer, and I'm surprised that it's not making a bigger splash. But maybe Ukraine's president isn't being 100% honest when it comes to a deal to show gratitude to the United States of America by offering some of its minerals. Check this out.
Well, first off, they've got to change the fact that on the 17th of January, the British signed an agreement with Ukraine to have exclusive rights to those deals. Kirchner, this is a battle of dueling narratives. You can go check it out. This is on the British UK website. It talks about this 100-year Ukraine and UK signed a 100-year deal
Right.
over security guarantees and economic development. So what happened is that I believe President Trump and his team found out that they were being played. So this has become a set of dueling narratives. The BBC just said today there's massive protests here. Zach Andrews just said all the European leaders are behind Zelensky. We are being played. We, the United States, are trying to be signed up to a deal that we provide security guarantees to a economic development deal that Keir Starmer has already signed them up to do. So the first thing it has to do is people have to take a step back and be honest with what's really going on. And so I think what happened here, I don't know the details, it wasn't in that meeting, but Kershaw, the president was trying to play a straight line deal to sign an agreement with them over this mineral rights deal, knowing full well that the British had already signed on this 3 days before his inauguration. So where we go from here is both sides, if this is going to work, if the Europeans really want our help, they're going to have to take a step back and start being honest with the United States about what's really going on.
There you go. I think that our culture, when it comes to these stories and the narrative, there's a lack of honesty. Honest to God, if you believe everything you hear in the news without checking yourself. And so I actually looked at that particular website and I saw that this deal was made prior to the meeting on February the 28th. And so I think the Prime Minister of England, really, he does not like Trump. Most English don't, because he's called them out, even though we are a great ally. But at one point, remember, we fought them for our own independence. It's just the way the world is. There's always going to be ups and downs. Friends are going to become enemies. Enemies are eventually going to become friends. And if you just kind of follow Jesus Christ in all of this, which is what I'm going to be getting to in my commentary, then maybe we can actually find the peace that is needed. But there is such a desire to become powerful. And it seems that the Prime Minister of England just wants to be the world power on which the world can rely on, because at one point, even now, I can say this, the world depends on the United States. I mean, my goodness, the United Nations, just keeping peace, the amount of money we give to disaster relief, I mean, NATO, the space programs, all of that is primarily funded by America. And we have to admit that. And I guess a thing that we don't understand in culture is that just because you are not an ally doesn't necessarily make you an enemy. I am no pro-Putin sympathist. I'm not sympathetic to Putin at all. I think he's been in power too long. I do think he's a dictator. But I also think that Zelensky is a dictator based on what Ukrainians say about him. I mean, this is a man who is basically a puppet to Russia as well as Ukraine. I mean, he was an actor, a comedian, he's a producer. He played the role of somebody who became a president. And it's almost like the script came true because that's what the people who wrote the script wanted to happen. But check out what Putin says about Zelensky. I know that they are not friends. They are certainly enemies, but they are neighbors. But sometimes I think that Putin is more honest in the same way Donald Trump is way more honest. You always know what he's thinking, sadly. But in this case, we don't know what Zelensky's thinking. I certainly don't know what European Union leaders are thinking, because they're the ones who say we're going to support this war effort, but they've offered almost very little money compared to what the United States has offered. And they're the actual neighbors. So listen to what Putin has to say.
Finally, he has cornered himself with the decree banning negotiations with the Russian Federation on a peace agreement. Why? Because if negotiations were to begin sooner or later, and most likely quite quickly, it would lead to the need to lift martial law. And as soon as that happens, elections must be held immediately. There would no longer be any grounds for not holding elections, as the current justification for not conducting elections in Ukraine is the presence of martial law. But if negotiations take place, followed by the likely quick necessity of lifting martial law, elections would have to be held right away. And that's where the current head of the regime faces a problem. His rating is exactly half that of his closest potential political rival. The current head of the regime has absolutely no chance of winning the election.
You know, I have been told the internal polls of Ukraine is that many people do not support President Zelensky. And if there would be an election, he would lose quite handedly. It would be very, very clear that he was not a good president leader. But he has suspended it because of this war. But if we can bring an end to this war, and even Putin said we can end this quickly, he just does not want Ukraine to be part of NATO. And you have to ask culturally, why? Why? Well, it'd be because it would be similar if China bought Canada and Mexico, and they are literally at our next door. And if we are not allies with China at present, we can be seen as competitors, and we can even see each other as, you know, somewhat at odds with each other. It would be just as uncomfortable. And that's why Russia does not want a NATO country next to his that are going to be militarily armed. Because I honestly think that while Putin is a dictator, so is Zelensky, because he chose not to have the elections. He has imprisoned people who speak against him, including journalists, many journalists, independent journalists, who had, so to speak, the goods on Zelensky and how he, as an actor, became the president. And I know people are going to say, well, Trump was an actor too, and he became president. But he was already rich. He was already rich. Now, granted, you're going to question where he got his wealth from, but since he became president, he became more poor. Well, poor, that's relative. He's still a billionaire, multi-billionaire, and still now the most powerful man in the world, so to speak. And that's what culture doesn't like. Because there are liberals out there who just hate Trump and want to replace his authority with theirs. The problem is Europe, trying to be a superpower, can't, because no country is big enough, population-wise or militarily, because frankly, they have done a pathetic job for many years, to kind of create a sense of unity in the European Union. They like to talk about it, but they're not very united at all, as this video kind of describes.
This was a meeting with enormous consequences.
Can Europe defend itself without America, Mr. President?
18 European leaders gathering in London.
Can Ukraine win without America?
Even the Canadian Prime Minister turned up.
Is the West falling apart, Prime Minister?
Trying to secure the future of Ukraine after his Oval Office bust-up with the US President.
Can you save your relationship with President Trump?
The backdrop to this meeting is far worse than European leaders envisaged just a few days ago. Not just the future of Ukraine at stake, but the security of all of Europe too.
Okay, let's go.
The leaders made clear their support for President Zelensky, queuing up to embrace him. Then it was down to business. Keir Starmer said the UK and France had agreed to lead a coalition of the willing to defend any future peace deal in Ukraine.
The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting. But to support peace in our continent and to succeed, this effort must have strong US backing. We are at a crossroads in history today. This is not a moment for more talk. It's time to act, time to step up and lead.
It is time to step up and lead, but you know what? They're about like 80 years too late. In many ways, they are trying to come together now because they're forced to, simply because America is telling the world we're not paying everyone's bills anymore. And I do think that America has a right to do that. Now, is that selfish of us? No, I don't think so. Because remember, our job is to love thy neighbor. And who is our neighbor? Well, the people in our own country first. And I know that the Holy Father might say, oh no, it's the Good Samaritan model for the Ordo Amoris, this mentality of, it's not like concentric circles, but it's like whoever needs the help, they should get the help now. But I think that the uncovering of Doge's efforts to reveal the amount of corruption and disgusting corruption with money in particular that could have gone to support America's needs, the needy in America, and there are many, could have then be spilt out to help the people in South America and then to other countries, including Ukraine. But the problem that we have is that no one was actually doing their part to work for peace. Europe is now only trying to come together to do something to make peace. And what's their solution? We're going to talk about in my commentary. I know that this is a longer than normal video, but if you can just indulge me for now, I kind of want to outline a few ideas as a Catholic priest and our takeaway as Catholics. I don't try to be biased. I try to just give you the facts and also apply common sense, inspired by scriptures, like who is our neighbor? Like, how do we discern whether or not we can win a battle with only 10,000 when we have an enemy with 20,000? There's got to be some common sense principles, and thankfully Jesus can teach that to us. And his number one thing that I remember this, even just from the book of the prophet Isaiah, we have to get to the point where we turn spears into plowshares, swords into pruning hooks. When we stop making weapons and start making farming equipment instead, so that we can feed each other, serve one another, love one another, and live with peace with each other despite our differences. But it seems to me that while Trump says it, nobody believes him. He was very clear in saying, I want to stop the fighting. I want to stop the killing. I want to stop the dying. I want to stop this war. And he promised, and I don't know why Zelensky would doubt this, that he would send American money as well as support to make sure that Ukraine would be protected, as long as negotiations took place between him, Zelensky, and Putin. And you know what Zelensky can bank on? The fact that during 2016 to 2020, there were no wars and there was no aggression. Remember, the aggression between Russia and Ukraine started in 2014. In 2016, it stopped. In 2021, it started again. In 2020, it started again very quickly. So I'm not quite sure why President Zelensky doesn't trust Trump, but it seems that there was a little bit of dishonesty on his part. But what does the European Union want to do? Support Zelensky. And how? By giving more money to keep the war going. A war that cannot be won without the United States' efforts and help. It's just clear. It's just clear. So what are we trying to do in Europe here? What are you trying to do? You say you want to be pro-Zelensky or pro-peace, because it seems that Zelensky just wants to keep the war going, even though we know he can't. Now, granted, we thank God that they are patriotic, but patriotic also requires a little common sense. You're going to kill all your people before you actually even have a country left worth celebrating. And so what can be done? Well, I think what we've got to do is truly look at some of the things that was said. Is there actual gratitude? What does that look like? For me, gratitude looks more humble. And I did not see humility on the part of Zelensky. I saw a man who felt very propped up by the Democratic Party and also by the European Union that promised that they're always going to support him. And he kind of walked in probably thinking he's just going to get whatever he asks for. So he was kind of manipulated and lied to. And we've seen that happen. Goodness gracious, in the recent elections, Miss Harris felt that she was going to win easily. Even though she said it was going to be a hard fight, in her mind, she thought she was just going to win. Why? Because people were propping her up. They were lying to her. Mr. Zelensky needs a little bit more humility, which comes with gratitude, knowing that he's not in a position to negotiate, but he's got to be in a position to just be humble and ask for help and to look like you care. You know, people ask, was it fair for that reporter to ask about the suit? Okay, yes, it was, because he has worn suits before. What he's wearing is an outfit to kind of play a character role, like he's some sort of general of an army. And what's frustrating for me is that I've seen him dress well when he and his wife strolled through New York City, her buying millions of dollars worth of luxury items when he came to speak at the United Nations. So look the part. Where do you get this? Well, for me, I look at Matthew 22, and this is verse 11. But when the king came to see the dinner guests, he saw a man there who was not dressed appropriately in a wedding clothes. And he said, "Friend, how did you come here without wearing the wedding clothes that we provided for you?" And so the guy just didn't want to wear it because he wanted to prove a point, threw him out. So I think that there is, I'm not saying that that's the scripture that we use, but my goodness, there's got to be a level of humility and gratitude when it comes to negotiating, because he was not in a position to do so. He is literally conscripting people to fight on the front lines. There are some reports, I can't prove this, but I've seen enough videos of Ukrainian soldiers almost kidnapping single men in vans and apparently putting them on front lines. I don't like it when people raise voices and argue with each other. And sadly, President Zelensky just was at a disadvantage. It will look like he was being attacked or he was being set up and, double teamed against him. But he requested to come to America for this meeting, which was simply supposed to just be a signing, a declaration of a shared expense, basically giving minerals to the United States. That's all it was supposed to be. And it turned into this dumpster fire. And what got Trump most angry was when Zelensky kind of pushed a veiled threat that somehow, while there might be a big body of water between us, not helping us, you're going to feel it in America. Oh, that truly challenged Mr. Trump, because he's like, you can't tell us how we are going to feel. It was a little arrogant, to be honest with you. And so knowing that a deal was already made with the European Union, can Zelensky be trusted? And when we look at what was done in the Oval Office, it looked like the ugliness of diplomacy. But it should not be litigated in front of the cameras. So there were some good things about that and bad things. The good thing is we actually see how ugly negotiation can be. The bad thing is we saw how ugly negotiations can be. And the fact is, the majority of American people do not have the stomach to deal with people arguing. There are some people who just shut down completely as soon as someone's voice is raised. Me and my brother, we love each other, but he drives me nuts sometimes. And I'm going to give you an example. He wants to always have me come out to go dancing with him. I'm a priest, for God's sakes. I'm not going to go dancing with him, but he wants me to go, and he'll make me feel guilty for not hanging out with him. No. And as soon as I raise my voice, like, that is not going to happen, he's like, fine, I don't want to, That's my brother's approach to arguing. He doesn't like it. I don't mind it. And I know a lot of American people, when they see this argumentation, they don't want to deal with it. And so the one who screams the loudest, they think, is the meaner one. And there could be a lot of passive aggression, which I saw on the part of Mr. Zelensky. I think that we need more common sense. But common sense needs to be tempered by history, actual history. And I don't think a lot of people understand. I don't fully understand the history. I know enough to have been able to make a formed opinion that says, I know Putin's a dictator. I know Zelensky's a dictator. I know that we as Americans, we as Catholics, should not be trying to fund an ongoing war. We need to find an immediate ceasefire reason and a way for peace. And a way for peace isn't give us more money, give us more weapons. Ultimately, what this requires is for us to understand what it means to love your neighbor. And what's sad to me is that the Orthodox Church in Ukraine and the Orthodox Church in Russia are not playing a bigger role in trying to find peace amongst their leaders. That's my saddest takeaway. I know that we talked a lot about some things that might have kind of gone over your head. I certainly hope this makes sense. I hope that you were able to follow along. Please make sure you like, subscribe, share, and comment. Let me know what you think. And please consider supporting us on our Patreon. That's the only way we can do the research to give you, hopefully, something to think about so that you as a Catholic will know that the only way that you're going to have peace is if you have it in your own heart first. That requires humility, gratitude, respect. It requires a good way of speaking with each other, but it also requires a toughness that you can't be afraid to talk about the difficult things. But it also talks about how we need to be willing to sacrifice for the other. Sacrifice for the other. Even if when Jesus sacrificed for us, sadly, we can be sometimes ungrateful too. So we can learn a lot from this negotiation debacle. So please support us on our Patreon community so that we can continue to dish out faith, culture, and commentary. God bless you, and stay hungry for God.